You ever hear a child say something that makes your stomach turn cold? Something so out of place, so quietly unsettling that for a moment the whole world just stops? That's exactly what happened to me last month. Only it didn't last a moment. It's still going. And I'm still trying to understand what my son meant when he looked up from his cereal bowl and said, with the calmness of a whisper, asterisk, when can I see my first family again? Asterisk. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe he was adopted. Maybe there's something we're hiding from him. But let me say this loud and clear, asterisk asterisk, we never adopted him. Asterisk asterisk, he's ours. Biologically. Born in a hospital just 15 minutes from our home. There's no mystery about his birth. Or at least there wasn't supposed to be. But now I'm questioning everything. And by the end of this story you'll see why. You're going to get the answer you came here for, but what you uncover along the way might leave you just as shaken as I was. So don't click away. Don't scroll past. This one's personal and I need you with me through the end. We live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Nashville, your typical suburb with white fences, backyard swing sets, and neighbors who wave but don't really talk. You know the kind. I'm a high school teacher. My wife, Claire, works from home doing marketing. We're as boringly normal as it gets. Or at least we were. Our son Mason is 7. Bright, curious, kind-hearted. The kind of kid who builds Lego castles for bugs and apologizes when he accidentally steps on grass. We've never had issues with him. Not behavioral, not medical, not emotional. Just a happy kid in a happy home. Until about 6 weeks ago when the questions started. At first they were easy to shrug off. Innocent. Random. Did my first mom like peanut butter too? Or, do we have red chairs like before? But then they grew more specific. More unsettling. Why did my first dad cry when the water came? Or, can we drive back to the yellow house with the orange door? I think they miss me. He would say it like it was a memory. Not a dream. Not a story he made up. A memory. And it scared the hell out of us. We thought maybe it was something he'd seen on YouTube Kids. Those weird algorithmic videos that stitch together creepy ideas and pass them off as nursery rhymes. We checked his tablet. Nothing. We put on parental controls, deleted apps, turned off the TV. But still, the memories kept coming. And not in a way that felt like pretend. Mason wasn't playing. He was remembering. Places we've never been. People we've never met. Details that no 7-year-old should be able to conjure on his own. He described a room with sunflowers on the ceiling. A dog named Baxter who slept by the cold wall. A rainy night when everything got loud and mommy fell asleep and didn't wake up. Claire and I exchanged so many looks behind his back those first few days. Looks that said, "Do you remember that? And should we be worried?" We thought maybe it was something from a past life or a phase or just his imagination on overdrive. Until we found the drawing. Now I know that sounds dramatic, but when you're a parent, you know your kid's art style. Mason draws stick figures with big heads and always gives people 4 fingers. Always. But this paper, this one was different. It had depth. Shadows. A house drawn from an angle, not straight on. It was a 2-story colonial with an orange front door and a mailbox shaped like a fish. It was eerie in its detail. Claire and I stared at it for a long time before she whispered, "That's not anything we've ever seen, right?" And I said what she already knew. No. It's not. And just like that, the questions we kept brushing off turned into red flags we couldn't ignore. Who had Mason drawn that house for? And how did he know it so well? So we sat him down one night, gently, trying not to scare him, and asked about the drawing. He blinked like we were the ones being weird. "That's the house from before," he said. "Before I came here." I asked, "Before you came where, buddy?" He smiled like it was obvious. "Before I came to this family. My second family." My wife looked at me white as a ghost. I felt my hands go cold. And I asked the only thing I could think to ask, "Who told you that, Mason?" And do you know what he said? "No one. I just remember." Now, I need you to stay with me here. Because this isn't just a creepy kid story. This isn't one of those kids say the darndest things situations. I've seen those stories on TikTok and Reddit too. Kids talking about past lives or reincarnation or seeing ghosts. This isn't like that. Mason isn't talking about dying or being someone else. He's talking about living, having lived in a place with people in a life he fully believes was real. And not just believes, remembers. With full clarity. The way you remember your old school, your childhood bedroom, your favorite bike. That's how he talks about this first family. And I don't think he's making it up. I know that's a heavy thing to say. But it's why I'm sharing this with you. Because something's going on here, and I need your eyes on this. Your thoughts. Your logic. Because every day it gets weirder. We started digging into everything. medical records, birth certificate, hospital files. We even reached out to the delivery nurse from the day Mason was born. Nothing out of the ordinary. No mix-ups. No gaps in time. He was born to us, registered to us, discharged to us. There's no mystery there. But when we asked Mason if he remembered being a baby, being in a hospital, or being little, he shook his head. I didn't come to you as a baby. I came after the water. I was older. Then I got smaller again. That sentence haunts me. Asterisk. Then I got smaller again. Asterisk, like time rewound for him. Like he moved backward. Like somehow he started over. And now Claire started having dreams. The same one over and over. A woman screaming from behind a glass window. A boy being pulled underwater. A door slamming shut. We're not spiritual people. We've never been into dream meanings or energy readings or any of that. But now, we're questioning everything. Because last night, Mason woke up crying. Not whimpering, not scared. Crying. Like something had been ripped away from him. He kept whispering, "She needs me. She's still in the dark." And when we asked who, he looked us dead in the eyes and said, "My first mom. The real one. The one I lost." If you're still watching, I need you to understand, this isn't about whether or not reincarnation is real. This isn't about ghosts or possession or imagination. This is about a boy who remembers someone else's life with terrifying clarity. And we don't know how, or why, or what it means. But we're going to find out. Because after what happened last week, we're no longer just observers in this story. We're in it. And it's not letting us go. Something is trying to speak through our son. Something that refuses to be buried. And what we're uncovering, it's darker than we ever imagined. At first, we did what most rational parents would do. We tried to explain it away. Maybe Mason had overheard something or seen an image online that sparked this chain reaction in his mind. Maybe a neighbor told him something in passing. Maybe he saw something on a Netflix kids show that planted the seed. We scoured our own conversations, double-checked his YouTube watch history, even asked his teacher at school if anything strange had come up in class discussions or art time. But everything came back clean. No clues. No cues. No obvious sources for where this story was coming from. Claire was the first to suggest we keep a journal, a way to document the things Mason said and when. At first, it felt excessive, but then one day he pointed at a random family on a missing persons poster outside the grocery store and whispered, "That's her. That's my other mom." It wasn't even the current poster. It was one of those old, sun-bleached flyers half torn from rain. The woman on it had gone missing 15 years ago. Mason said her name was Eliza. But the flyer listed her as Elizabeth Caro. And that's when things shifted for us, from weird to chilling. Now look, I don't want to sound like we just dove headfirst into some conspiracy hole. We're not those parents who believe their kid is the reincarnation of a Civil War general or some ancient prophet. But when your 7-year-old starts describing events from a life he couldn't possibly know, down to the street address and the layout of the backyard, you don't ignore that. You can't. Especially not when you verify those places actually exist. Especially not when the places he's describing match public records and aren't on any map apps for kids to just stumble across. The house Mason drew with the orange door and fish mailbox? We found it. In Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about an hour and a half from us. It's real. And it's not for sale, not for rent. No photos online. And yet, Mason described the exact chipped brick on the left-hand column, the broken swing in the back, even the crack in the driveway like he'd walked that path 100 times before. The kicker? That house belonged to Elizabeth Caro, the missing woman from the poster. Claire broke down when we made the connection. And I'll admit it, I was scared. Not just spooked but deeply existentially scared. Like something had cracked open in the world I thought I understood. We debated going to the police. But what would we say? That our son had memories? Dreams? Psychic visions? We didn't want to risk them thinking we were exploiting a tragedy. We didn't want CPS knocking on our door because they thought we were feeding our child delusions. So we kept it quiet. Kept digging on our own. What we didn't expect was how quickly the lines between imagination and reality would begin to blur. Mason started sleepwalking. He'd be found standing by the front door, mumbling to himself. One night, I followed him without waking him. He walked to the hallway wall and traced his fingers across it like he was counting bricks. 1, 2, 3, then open, he muttered. We didn't understand it at the time, but it kept happening. Around this point, Claire reached out to a local hypnotherapist who specialized in childhood trauma and memory recall. She was careful about how she worded it, didn't mention past lives or paranormal stuff. just that our son was having persistent, specific memories that didn't match anything from his actual life. The therapist, Dr. Isla Brennan, was open-minded but cautious. She agreed to meet with Mason. We only did one session, and it changed everything. During that session, fully supervised, Dr. Brennan asked Mason to describe his first family. He listed names. Full names. Not just mom or dad, but Eliza Caro, Calvin Caro, and baby June. Claire and I froze. We hadn't said anything about the last name from the poster. And baby June? There was no mention of a child in any of the missing person reports. But after some digging we found an obituary. June Caro. Died at just 4 months old. No photo. No further details. Buried in a small plot at Oak Haven Cemetery. Mason had never heard of that name before, and yet when we said it aloud to test him, he whispered, "That's my baby sister. She was so small, like a kitten." At this point, the rational explanation started slipping away. YouTube algorithm glitches weren't going to cut it. We were dealing with something deeper. Something older. Something that had embedded itself into our son like a splinter from a different life. But here's where it gets even more confusing, and here's where I want your attention because I need help unraveling this. The more we looked into the Caros, the more questions we uncovered. Their home was sold 5 years after Elizabeth's disappearance. Her husband, Calvin, had been under suspicion but was never charged. The case went cold. But guess where he moved after selling the house? To our neighborhood, 3 blocks over. Retired. Quiet. Keeps to himself. We'd waved at him on walks for years and never thought twice. Mason had even once called him, the man with the water eyes. We'd brushed it off. But now it sat heavy. We debated introducing Mason to him, to see if anything stirred. But we were afraid. What if it triggered something traumatic? What if we were wrong? What if, instead of protecting our son, we were shoving him towards something far more dangerous than we understood? And yet, that fear didn't stop the dreams. Or the drawings. Or the incident with the locked cabinet. Yeah, I haven't told you about that yet. A week ago, Mason wandered into the guest room and pried open the bottom drawer of a cabinet we've never used. Inside he pulled out a yellowed photo, one we didn't even know we had. It was old, torn at the corners, showing a woman with her arms around a toddler, standing in front of a sunflower mural. Mason looked at it and said, "That's me. That's before the water came." Claire asked where he got the photo. He said, "It was calling me." That same night, he had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop for almost 10 minutes. I'm not saying the two are connected. I'm just saying it happened. And now, Claire's begun questioning if we ever really knew what happened the day Mason was born. She's gone full-on into our hospital records. Called the midwife who helped with the delivery. Checked every timestamp, every signature. And something doesn't sit right with her. The birth record time and the hospital security logs show a 28-minute discrepancy. Not much unless you're looking for something. But it's there. A blacked-out interval. No explanation. Just a note that says temporary system outage. When she asked about it, the hospital claimed it was a logging error from a software update. But when Claire asked for backup logs, they said those were purged after 7 years. It's been 7 years and 3 months. So now we're stuck in this limbo. On one hand, we have a son we've raised since day one, who suddenly speaks with a clarity and knowledge that feels impossible. On the other hand, we have a missing woman, a dead infant, and a man who may have once been a suspect living 3 blocks away. And somewhere in the middle of that, there's a house that Mason seems to know like the back of his hand, down to the placement of a trapdoor he insists is under the floorboards in the laundry room. We're planning to go to that house. Even if it means trespassing. We have to see if what he's saying is true. Because if it is, if that trapdoor exists, then all bets are off. We're no longer just dealing with memory. We're dealing with something that refuses to stay buried. Something that may never have been solved. Something, or someone, that might be reaching out through our child trying to finish what was started. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night. Not the drawings. Not the dreams. Not the whispers in the hallway. It's the idea that maybe, just maybe, Mason isn't alone in there. That maybe what's inside him, what's trying to speak through him, isn't him at all. We've kept all this quiet, but something tells me we're not the only ones who've experienced it. That's why I'm putting this out here. That's why I need you, yes you watching this, to really pay attention. Because I believe the answers are in plain sight. Hidden in all the noise. Buried in old files, old photos, and maybe even old lies. Someone out there knows more. Maybe you've seen something. Maybe you felt this too. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. And just when we thought we were beginning to understand what was happening, When we felt we might finally gain control over this mystery, Mason did something that shattered all sense of safety we had left. We woke up 2 nights ago and he was gone. His bed empty. His shoes missing. The front door wide open. We found him barefoot on the neighbor's lawn, staring up at the moon, humming a lullaby we'd never taught him. And when we asked what he was doing out there in the middle of the night, he just said, "I heard her voice again. She said she found the door." And that's where everything changes. We thought we were prepared for whatever came next. After that night, the one where Mason wandered barefoot into the neighbor's yard, we tightened everything. New locks, alarms, motion detectors on the windows. We even moved his bed into our room for a few days. But none of that mattered because it wasn't about keeping him inside. It was about keeping something else out. The very next day we drove to the Caro house in Murfreesboro. We didn't have a plan beyond just standing on the street watching it, seeing if anything clicked. But Mason didn't hesitate. He pointed right to the back window and said, "That's where she dropped the bottle." The milk spilled on the rug. Claire and I exchanged a look. It wasn't just the accuracy, it was the tone. It was personal. Like he'd been angry at her, like he remembered her mistake. We didn't get a chance to get any closer though because the current homeowner spotted us from the porch and called out before we could make up a good excuse. I stepped forward, started stammering something about being interested in buying, but before I could finish, the woman looked directly at Mason and said, "He's been here before, hasn't he?" We froze. I asked what she meant, but her face closed off. She muttered something about bad memories, that too many strangers had come snooping lately, and then she warned us to leave it alone. "That house brings out things that don't belong in this world," she said. "And whatever's pulling him back there, it doesn't want closure. It wants chaos." I tried to press her. Asked if she knew anything about the Caros. She shook her head once and slammed the door. Claire begged me not to push it further. But I couldn't let it go. Something about that woman's face, her voice, it wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Like she knew Mason. Or what had been inside him before. That same night, when we got back home, Claire went to pull out the manila folder where we'd been keeping everything. Printouts of Elizabeth's missing persons file, photos of the Caro house, Mason's drawings, Dr. Brennan's session notes. But it was gone. Completely gone. Not moved. Not misplaced. Just gone. The folder had been in the locked file drawer of Claire's desk for days. She swore she hadn't touched it. I hadn't either. And Mason, who we questioned gently and repeatedly, said something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't me. It was the tall man in the hallway. He said papers make it worse. We both laughed nervously at first. But then Mason added, "He told me not to tell you. He said he'd go away if I stayed quiet." Claire grabbed my arm. Her hand was shaking. She looked pale, like someone had pulled the oxygen out of her lungs. "That's what she said in the dream," she whispered. "The woman behind the glass. She mouthed the same thing, asterisk don't speak. He's listening, asterisk." Up until that point, I'd been trying to rationalize everything. Maybe we were just feeding into each other's fears. Maybe our son was unusually intuitive. Maybe stress was distorting everything. But now it was all starting to align, too neatly, too often, too eerily. And still we couldn't stop ourselves. I started reaching out to people who had investigated the Caro case back when it first happened. One detective, retired now, agreed to speak with me off the record. He didn't say much. Just told me to let sleeping devils lie. When I asked what he meant, he went quiet for a long time and then said, "We were told to back off. That's all you need to know." Before he hung up, he added something that's been ringing in my head since. People think evil shows up with a pitchfork. But sometimes it just moves into your home and calls you dad. Then there was the USB drive. That was the next twist. Claire had backed up some of our research, just basic stuff, onto a flash drive she kept hidden in the garage toolbox just in case. We never told Mason. Never even opened the drawer while he was in the room. But 3 days ago we found it lying on the floor of the hallway, cracked in half. We couldn't figure out how it got there. Claire was certain she'd locked that drawer. And when we asked Mason about it, he started crying, not tantrum crying, not frustrated, but something deeper. Panicked. He kept saying, "I didn't mean to break it, but he told me it would burn." We tried to soothe him, told him everything was okay, but he curled up on the couch and begged us to make the eyes go away. When we asked what eyes, he whispered, "The ones in the mirror. The ones that aren't mine." He hasn't looked at himself in a mirror since. And that's not even the worst part. Not yet. Because while all this was happening, we noticed something else. Claire's old friend, Natalie, had started acting strange. Natalie's a family friend, someone who used to babysit Mason when he was little. She even stayed with us for a few weeks after a breakup a couple years back. She'd always been sweet, stable, a little quirky but nothing alarming. But recently she's been distant. Avoiding us. Not responding to messages. Then out of nowhere she sent Claire a voice note, garbled, rushed, barely coherent. She said she saw the boys' drawing, and that it matches the inside of the old Caro basement. But then her voice dropped and she muttered, "I wasn't supposed to say that. I wasn't even supposed to know." The message cut off. When we tried calling her, it went straight to voicemail. We haven't heard from her since. That's when Claire finally broke down and told me something she'd never mentioned before, something that changed everything. Back when Mason was born, right after delivery, there was a brief moment, maybe 5 minutes, where the nurse wheeled him out for a routine exam. Claire had been half asleep, groggy from medication. But when they brought him back, she remembers looking at his face and feeling off. Not like he looked different exactly, but like something had changed. She brushed it off as postpartum anxiety. But now, with everything unraveling around us, she was wondering, what if it wasn't the same baby that came back in? What if something happened during that 28-minute system outage? What if someone swapped a file, a bracelet, a child? I told her it was impossible. But even I couldn't say it with confidence. Not anymore. Every path we follow seems to disappear just as we get close. People won't talk. Records vanish. Mason's memories shift. And now the house, the Caro house, has been boarded up overnight. No listing, no explanation. Just caution tape around the perimeter and a sign from the city claiming structural concerns. We drove by this morning. Mason was quiet the whole ride, and just before we passed it, he whispered from the back seat, "They're burying her again." But this time it's louder. We don't know what that means. We don't know who they are. But we know we're not alone anymore. Someone is watching. Listening. And whatever we're circling, it doesn't want to be found. Or maybe it does, but only on its own terms. And last night we got a package. No return address. No name. Inside was a photograph. Faded, decades old. It showed a hospital hallway, dated 2017, the same month Mason was born. In the center of the photo is a nurse, smiling at the camera. But behind her, in the corner near the emergency door, is a man in a hospital gown, standing barefoot and staring into the lens. His eyes look just like Mason's. The note taped to the back said, "You picked the wrong baby." And now we don't know if we ever picked it all. Claire didn't speak for a full minute after reading the note. She just stood there in the kitchen, fingers trembling as she turned the photo over again and again, like maybe, if she blinked hard enough, the words would change. "You picked the wrong baby." I kept waiting for her to snap out of it, to say something, anything that might help ground the moment. But when she finally looked up at me, her expression wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. It was recognition. She whispered, "That man in the photo, I've seen him before. I just didn't remember until now." She ran into our bedroom, opened a shoebox I hadn't seen in years, one from the hospital where Mason was born. It had keepsakes, his birth bracelet, a tiny knit cap, and a worn-out folder of printed discharge papers. She pulled out a page that had a checklist of nurses and attendants from that night. And there it was, on the list of rotating ER staff, a name we didn't recognize until that moment. Peter Kane. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to entertain the idea that the man lurking in the background of that photo could have actually been working there the night our son was born. But the timestamp matched. The hallway matched. And the eyes, God help me, the eyes matched. We were still piecing that together when Claire's sister Jordan called in a panic. She lives in Asheville, a few hours away, and we hadn't spoken to her in weeks. She was crying, barely coherent, saying she woke up to find a photograph slipped under her front door. No envelope, no message, just an old black and white picture of two small children standing outside what looked like a hospital nursery. One of the children had their face scratched out in pen. On the back, scrawled in sharp, jagged handwriting, were the words, asterisk, "It's not just your boy." Asterisk. Claire dropped her phone. She was shaking, pale, like someone had flipped a switch and drained her of blood. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. But I had a question. How would anyone know to contact Jordan? She wasn't involved. She wasn't even in the same state. The deeper we went, the more this thing reached beyond just us. It was growing roots in places we hadn't even looked. We started retracing steps, looking for a pattern. But each path we followed seemed to contradict what we knew before. Dr. Brennan, the hypnotherapist, called us out of the blue and told us she'd reviewed the session recordings again, just to be sure she hadn't missed anything. There was a sequence in Mason's voice, a pattern of syllables he kept repeating softly under his breath. At first she thought it was gibberish, until she fed the audio through a phonetic filter. She believes Mason was speaking an old dialect, Appalachian English from early 1900s, phrases long out of use. One stuck out, asterisk, the drowned don't stay still. Asterisk, she played it for us. Mason had been mumbling it for over 3 minutes without stopping, like he was in a trance. We checked the audio timestamps and realized he'd said it the same night we found him on the neighbor's lawn. That wasn't coincidence. That was something else breaking through. And then Natalie, Claire's old friend, resurfaced. She sent a text message at 3:12 a.m., just one word, asterisk, help. Asterisk, we tried calling. No answer. The message came from a prepaid number, but the area code was nearby, less than an hour away. We drove out that morning, following the GPS coordinates we traced from the phone. What we found was an abandoned trailer deep in the woods, padlocked and overgrown. But what rattled us most wasn't the structure. It was the smell. Damp, like stagnant water and old mildew. Claire stepped inside after we broke the lock, and I could tell right away she wished she hadn't. It was stripped bare. No furniture, no clothes, nothing personal, except for one thing, a child's drawing pinned to the wall with a knife. It showed a stick figure family standing on a hill. One figure was drawn upside down with red excess for eyes. Scribbled across the bottom were the words, asterisk, this isn't your child. Asterisk, I ripped it down and stuffed it into my coat pocket. Claire didn't say a word for the rest of the drive back. That night, Mason had another episode. He screamed himself awake, sobbing, clutching his chest like he couldn't breathe. When we asked what happened, he said, the water came back. But this time it wanted to take someone else. We tried to press him for more, but he just kept asking if the girl from the mirror was okay. We don't have a girl in our house. We don't have mirrors in his room. But he insisted, absolutely insisted, that someone else had been with him, trapped behind glass, banging to get out. And for the first time he seemed terrified for her. Not of her. Whatever this was, it wasn't just haunting him. It was haunting someone else through him. The next morning I got a call from an old coworker, Reggie, someone I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. He was a tech consultant who used to help me debug classroom software and knew his way around hospital backend systems. I'd reached out to him a week ago, asking if he could help retrieve archived data from the hospital's lost security footage around Mason's birth. He said it was impossible. But now he was calling to say he found something strange. Not files, asterisk log star. Logs of employee entries, badge swipes, access codes, tiny fragments that had been left behind. He said someone accessed the maternity wing 4 separate times that night without scanning a badge. The system flagged it as a ghost entry, which usually means the badge scanner was either bypassed or someone entered during a time when logging was disabled. The weirdest part? The entries all came from a staff ID registered to a nurse who died 6 months earlier. Reggie was freaked out. He asked if I'd told anyone else. I hadn't. He said I should be careful, that he was deleting the logs on his end after sending me a copy. But when I opened the file later that day, it was corrupted, just strings of symbols and static. All Reggie said in his last message was, they're watching the servers. Every new piece of information was unraveling something else. The story wasn't linear anymore. It was fracturing. Layers on layers. Now, we were starting to question the entire hospital. The entire system. What if this wasn't just about our son's memories or a single night gone wrong? What if something had been engineered? Something that required precise timing, people on the inside, someone to scrub files, manipulate records, plant just enough confusion that no one ever traced it back? Claire's been going through old email chains, texts, calls, looking for anything out of place. She found an old text from Natalie the week Mason was born. It said, asterisk, if anything feels wrong, don't ask questions. Just love him. Some doors don't close again. Asterisk, we never noticed it before. Never thought it was anything but a supportive message from a friend. But now it reads like a warning. And then, just when I thought we'd hit the ceiling of how strange and tangled this thing could get, we received something that flipped everything upside down. An envelope delivered by hand, no postage, left inside our mailbox. Inside was a single page, hospital paper, familiar header, time-stamped exactly the minute Mason was born. But instead of saying live birth, it was labeled reactivation. Not registration. Not delivery. Reactivation. It's not a standard term. We looked it up in every hospital form template, medical dictionary, even software settings. Nothing. The field doesn't exist in official records. But somehow it's right there. Signed. Time-stamped. And if it's real, it means everything we believed about that night was a lie. Not a mistake. A process. One that had a name. one that someone planned. And now we're starting to wonder, who is Mason really? Because someone, or something, wanted him back. And maybe it never asked us if we wanted him at all. It started with a sound, nothing obvious or dramatic, just the subtle squeak of the front porch step around 2 in the morning. A sound I'd dismissed for years as the wood settling or wind brushing too hard against the house. But this time it didn't fade into the background. It repeated. What? Then again. The creak of a careful footstep. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, unsure if I was imagining it. My wife lay beside me, sound asleep, and down the hall, my son's door was still slightly cracked like always. I slipped out of bed, padded across the carpet, and froze when I reached the window. There, across the lawn, the shape of a man lingered just beyond the reach of our porch light. He wasn't moving. He was watching. And I swear to God he was holding something like a photograph. The police came and swept the area, but there were no prints, no evidence, no sign anyone had been there at all. They chalked it up to paranoia. A prank. Maybe even a stray neighbor. But that wasn't the part that got me. It was what my son said the next morning over breakfast that made my skin crawl. He looked up from his cereal, so casual and calm, and asked, "Daddy, was that my first father coming back for me?" My hand slipped, spilling coffee across the table, and I stared at him as though he'd just spoken in a foreign language. Because how could he know those words? How could he possibly think that? He's never been adopted. Never been fostered. He's been ours since birth, or at least that's what we believed. That was the moment the fear really set in. Not because of some shadowy figure on the porch, but because of the realization that something was off with our reality, like the life we'd built had a seam down the middle we'd never noticed. I asked my wife again, really asked, if there was any possibility we hadn't been told the whole truth at the hospital. Had she seen anything suspicious in those early days, any inconsistencies in our paperwork? Her face went pale and she got quiet. And then she admitted something I'd never heard before. Apparently, one of the nurses had handed her the wrong baby in the nursery, only for another nurse to correct it seconds later. It was nothing, she said quickly, trying to brush it off. They were just exhausted. Overworked. Hospitals make mistakes like that sometimes. But once you notice the crack, you can't unsee it. That morning I began digging. Birth records, hospital logs, staff names, even social media groups with parents who delivered at the same time. That's when things started vanishing. Emails I'd sent? Disappeared. A forum post I'd made asking about a specific nurse? Deleted within hours. Then came the burner text. Asterisk, stop asking questions. Let the past stay buried. Asterisk, my stomach flipped. This wasn't some coincidence. Someone knew I was digging, and they wanted it to stop. But I wasn't alone. A week later, my sister, who lives 3 towns over and only visits once a month, called me in a panic. Her 6-year-old had started having nightmares. Nightmares where he kept saying someone else was calling to him. Someone who used to be his real sister. That word again. Real. My sister hadn't even told her kid about what was going on in our house. She thought it was just a weird sleep phase, until he described our house perfectly, right down to the old tree stump in the backyard and the wind chimes we hung last summer. She was terrified. Said her son insisted he had been there before, and that the boy with the soft eyes still lives there. That boy was my son. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But it wasn't just strange dreams anymore. There was a pattern forming. Other children connected to us in some way, friends, family, even my coworker's daughter, started saying strange things about memories that weren't theirs. Places they'd never visited. Names their parents didn't recognize. And one name kept showing up, Larkin. My son said it in his sleep one night. Whispered it like a prayer over and over again until I finally shook him awake. I asked him who Larkin was. He looked confused, almost hurt. He was the one before me, he said. He told me where to find you. I don't know how to explain the feeling of hearing something like that come from your own child. Like your heart is being slowly twisted into knots and your stomach can't decide whether to vomit or scream. Who was Larkin? Was he some kind of imaginary friend? A ghost? A buried memory from another life? Or worse, was he real and connected to something darker, something that had been done rather than imagined? Desperate, I tried to retrace my son's birth. I revisited the hospital. But the wing where he was born had been renovated just a year after he was delivered. All the original nurses were gone. Transferred. Retired. Some unreachable. The one nurse my wife remembered vividly, Mara Lentz, was supposedly working in hospice care now. But when I called the number listed for her, the man on the other end went silent the moment I said her name. He just said, "Don't involve her in this. Not again." and hung up. That was the final push I needed to go straight to Mara in person. She lived upstate in a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall trees and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. I went there under the guise of being a family friend. But when she opened the door, her face dropped. She didn't even let me speak. She just whispered, "I told them this would happen again," and slammed the door shut. So now I had a name. A thread. But still no answers. No explanation for why my son believed he belonged to someone else. No reason for the people connected to us acting like pieces in a puzzle they couldn't see. And then came the twist that broke everything wide open. My wife disappeared. Not for long, just 2 hours. But she was unreachable. Her phone was off, her car left behind. She said she was going to the grocery store and just never came back. When she finally returned, she looked dazed. Like someone had pressed pause on her brain. Her memory was foggy. She kept saying she got lost, but couldn't remember how. There was a small mark on her wrist, barely noticeable. Like someone had drawn a circle with an X through it in faint black ink. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked in her jacket pocket was a note. It only said 4 words, "He was never yours." Now the stakes were higher than ever. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. Someone was orchestrating it. Someone who knew exactly what we were afraid of, what we'd believe, and how far we were willing to go for the truth. My son had stopped asking about his first family. But now I couldn't stop thinking about them. Because the deeper I dug, the more I started to wonder, what if we weren't the ones who found him? What if he found us? And just as I started to believe we were closing in on something, anything, that could explain this tangled nightmare, we received a package. No return address. No postage. Just placed carefully at our doorstep in the middle of the night. Inside was a small, cloth-wrapped box and an old cassette tape labeled only with a single word, Larkin. And as I pressed play, the voice on the tape didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to me. But I had no memory of ever recording it. And that's when everything we believed about our son, our family, and even ourselves, started to come undone. It wasn't until the second time I listened to the cassette that I noticed it. My voice, yes, unmistakably mine, was saying things I couldn't remember ever recording, like a dream I'd forgotten or a memory I'd borrowed. The tape began with static, then a calm voice, measured and deliberate, reciting a list of numbers. I thought they were just a code, coordinates maybe, until the last sequence clicked something loose in my brain. It was the room number from the maternity wing of the hospital. The one where my wife had delivered our son. A room we were never supposed to be in. A room that, according to the hospital's administrative logs I'd tracked down weeks ago, had been closed off for renovation the night we were admitted. But we'd stayed there. We had photos to prove it. That room wasn't supposed to exist. And somehow my voice knew that. The realization sent a cold, sharp panic through me. If I'd recorded that message, it meant at some point I'd known the truth. I just didn't remember it. Or maybe I'd been made to forget. I decided to confront the only person left who hadn't run from this. My father. A quiet man, military background, always kept his opinions folded inside like pressed shirts. He'd never liked to talk about anything that veered into emotional terrain, but when I mentioned the hospital, his reaction was unlike anything I'd seen. He froze. Slowly sat down. Then, with a tired breath that sounded like it came from a different version of him, he said, "I hoped you'd never come this far. I prayed you wouldn't. But you're not wrong, son. You were never supposed to be in that room." He explained that in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a Black Ops program, never officially acknowledged, that dealt in experimental memory manipulation. Psychological reprogramming. The kind of thing that made conspiracy documentaries trend under true crime and government cover-up tags on YouTube today. They tested it on soldiers, he said, eyes distant. Then prisoners. Then children. Orphans. Infants. I felt sick. Sounded absurd. I told him he was losing it. He just shook his head and opened a locked drawer in his office. Inside was a manila folder. No markings. No label. Inside that, photos. Dozens. And in the middle of one black and white strip, was a baby. My son. Only, it couldn't have been. The date on the photo was from 12 years ago. And my son was 7. But there he was. Same eyes. Same birthmark on the shoulder. Same exact face. I staggered back, struggling to breathe, suddenly questioning everything. The adoption theory was wrong. The wrong baby hospital mix-up was a smokescreen. This wasn't about mistaken identity anymore, it was about deliberate placement. My father handed me another photo, this one grainy, taken from what looked like surveillance footage. It showed 2 figures leaving a dark hallway. One of them was my wife. The timestamp? 2 days before she went into labor. I told him that was impossible. She was in the house. She was pregnant. He said nothing for a long moment, then finally muttered, "Not everything you remember is real, son. Some memories are given to you. Some are stitched in." I felt like I was falling through the floor. I went home, eyes blurry, fists clenched, ready to demand the truth from my wife. But when I got there, she was already waiting. Calm. Almost too calm. She told me to sit. Then she pulled out a small hidden case from behind the bookshelf, one I'd never seen before. Inside it was a file labeled Operation Larkin. And when I opened it, I didn't see her name. I saw mine. I stared at her, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "You volunteered," she said softly. "All those years ago. You and me. We weren't supposed to fall in love. We weren't even supposed to remember each other. But something broke. Something stayed. I couldn't understand. My chest felt like it was caving in. You said we were the only way to keep him safe," she continued, her voice trembling now. "You said if we took him, raised him like our own, we could break the cycle. That he'd grow up normal. Human. Not trained." I backed away, hands shaking. "What is he?" I whispered. And then she said it. "He's not a who. He's a reset. A vessel. They've used him before and they'll use him again. Unless we stop them." Suddenly, it all made sense. The disappearing records, the odd connections, the flickers in my own memory, the hospital room that wasn't supposed to exist. We weren't just raising a boy. We were hiding something dangerous, something they tried to erase over and over. And I had been part of it. Not as a victim, but as an architect. And just as the weight of that sank in, my phone buzzed with a new message. An image. A photo of my wife, standing outside our house, taken just seconds ago. But she hadn't moved. And the text below it read, *, she's not your wife. She never was, *. And that's when I finally realized, the real mystery wasn't what they'd hidden. It was what they'd made me forget. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, that message burned behind his eyelids. *, she's not your wife. She never was. *. He stared at the real-time feed from the security camera, watching his wife. No, the woman he thought was his wife, standing perfectly still outside the house. The timestamp hadn't changed. It was as if the image was frozen, but the wind in the trees moved. The shadows shifted. Everything in the frame but her changed. He sat in the dark, feeling like a prisoner in his own home, watching the mother of his child, or the handler of his experiment, stand there in silence. And then the feed went black. He didn't know where she'd gone, or what she was waiting for. But when he turned around, she was standing in the hallway. Same calm eyes, same soft voice. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," she whispered, and that's when he snapped. He demanded the truth, not the lies she'd spoon-fed him for years, not the carefully woven storylines meant to keep him compliant, docile, loving. He wanted everything. And her face crumbled. Not in guilt, but grief. "They're watching," she said. "Every word we say right now is being logged. There's no safe place left." He told her he didn't care. He was done playing the role. And that's when she gave him the ultimatum. "They've activated the protocol. We have less than 72 hours before they reclaim him. But we still have a choice, walk away and let them take him, or fight back and lose everything." He laughed bitterly. "What's left to lose?" he asked, voice raw. But her eyes were different now, pleading, desperate. "Your mind," she said. "They'll wipe it clean again. If we fight, we'll remember nothing. Not each other. Not him. Not this moment. That's the cost. But if we walk away, he becomes theirs. The project restarts. You'll go back to your fake job. I'll vanish. And in 5 years, it'll happen to someone else." His heart ached with the weight of that decision. The woman he once married, now a stranger in every way, was offering him a brutal bargain. Love with no memory or memory with no love. He felt like he was sinking into concrete. Then came the sound, an unfamiliar ringtone from a phone he didn't own. She handed it to him without a word. On the screen was a live video feed of his son, asleep in his room. But the timestamp was off. It was dated 6 years ago. In the background, a woman's voice spoke softly to him, soothing him to sleep. It was his voice. Not hers. Not anyone else's. But how could that be? His son wasn't born then. He hadn't even met his wife yet. He asked her, nearly begging now to explain, and she looked away, her voice trembling. "He's been through this loop 4 times. You volunteered to keep trying. Each reset you insisted we do it differently. But it never works. They always find him. You were the one who erased your memory last time. You couldn't live with the guilt of failing him again." The words hit like a freight train. If it was true, if any of it was, then he wasn't just a victim. He was complicit. Willingly, repeatedly complicit in a lie crafted to shield something unimaginable. And now, for the first time, he had to live with that knowledge while making the hardest choice of all. He could rip it all down, pull the wires loose and expose the whole system to the world, but doing so would mean losing his son or worse, turning him into a fugitive hunted for what he was. Or he could run. Let the system wipe them again. Live in ignorant peace, tucked inside a story they'd been fed, knowing none of it was real but feeling it as if it were. And then, just as he was about to speak, the front door creaked open. A silhouette appeared in the frame. A man with a scar over his left eye. Someone who looked oddly familiar. Too familiar. He stepped forward and said one thing. "You told me to come back if it ever got this far." And with that, every fragile piece of certainty shattered again. The moment that scarred man stepped into the house, time warped around the air. It was like the gravity of the truth sucked the breath from the room. The man looked just like him, same build, same gait, even the same nervous habit of cracking his knuckles when he was about to lie. But this version, he was older, hardened, and his eyes didn't carry confusion. They carried resignation and pain. "Don't listen to her," he said, voice low and deliberate, pointing to the woman he had once built his life around. "She works for them. As from the start. She's the anchor to your loop." Everything in his chest constricted. "You mean she's not just the handler? She's the engineer. She built this reality. And she's been monitoring you since the beginning." She didn't deny it. Didn't even flinch. Just sat down on the edge of the couch like a woman exhausted from holding up too many lies for too long. "He's only telling you half the truth," she whispered. "Because that's all he remembers." And that's when the storm really broke. The man pulled a device from his jacket. No buttons, no screen, just a glowing red line, and laid it on the table. The moment it touched the wood, a projection snapped to life. Images. Hundreds. Thousands. His face in different cities. Different timelines. Each one with a child. Each one ending the same way. The child taken, he erased, loop restarted. "You were the original," the man said. "The one who started this mess. The rest of us," he gestured to the flickering versions of himself, "were just the echoes trying to fix what you broke." He tried to speak, but no words came. His hands trembled. "Why me?" he finally choked out. "Why would I do this? Why would I agree to any of this?" "You didn't," she said softly. "They chose you because you were easy to rewrite. You had the capacity for emotional recursion. Your brain naturally tried to reconnect dots even after memory erasure. They thought that made you an ideal candidate for long-term compliance." "They?" he asked, voice now rising, ragged with disbelief and fury. The man stepped in again, voice taut with urgency. "There's no single they. It's a collective. Tech conglomerates. Private military contractors. Genetic patent holders. Governments who realized if they couldn't control the future, they'd rewrite the past. Your son, he's not a boy. He's a variable. A living code fragment they've been trying to stabilize for 2 decades. The experiment was never about parenting. It was about containment." The walls of his mind began to collapse inward. Everything he thought was real, every memory, every emotion, every choice, was under question now. Fabricated? Controlled? Curated to manipulate him into believing he had free will? "Then why now?" he whispered. "Why come back? Why reveal all this now?" The older version of himself leaned closer, voice shaking, more human now than ever. "Because this loop's breaking down. Too many inconsistencies. Too many side effects. They're going to wipe the entire network. Kill the program. Kill us and take him off-world." "Off-world?" He laughed, a bitter, exhausted laugh. "You expect me to believe we're in a sci-fi movie now?" But she cut him off, stern, cold, unrecognizable. "We're not. You've always been in one. You just called it life." And with those words, the house exploded into noise. Sirens. Floodlights. A swarm of black-clad agents pouring through windows, kicking down doors. Not military. Not police. Something in between. The man, his twin, his echo, shoved the glowing device into his hands and screamed, "Run!" She didn't move. She just watched him with a look that broke his heart. Because for all the betrayal, all the manipulation, her eyes still carried something real: fear. Grief. Love. But he couldn't trust that anymore. That he grabbed the device, dodged the crashing wave of agents, and fled through the back door, his breath ragged in the cold night air. And as he ran, into the woods, into the darkness, into the unknown, the last thing he heard was her voice in his ear through a hidden comm still active in his jacket. They told me if this loop failed, they'd terminate all variables, including him. You have less than 24 hours. And then the comm went dead. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know what to believe. All he knew now was that the conspiracy was far bigger than him, and that someone was hunting his son not because of who he was, but because of what he could become. The abandoned observatory sat like a tomb on the edge of the mountain, silent and forgotten beneath the weight of a heavy sky. He could feel the wind shift around him as he approached, its howl mimicking the static still whispering through the comm in his jacket. Trees leaned in like spectators, branches brittle and swaying with anticipation, as though the forest itself knew this was where everything would unravel. The device in his pocket pulsed rhythmically, slower now like a heartbeat dying out. The older version of himself had said it would lead him here, but he hadn't explained why the signal ended with one final word flashing across the projection. Home. Inside, the observatory smelled like dust and old electricity. Cracked monitors blinked to life as he moved past them, casting green glow across walls covered in equations, diagrams, and timelines. Every iteration of his life was mapped here, stretching across the walls and looping, impossible patterns, every loop ending in a red X where his son was taken or erased. In the center of the room stood a chair, restrained, metal, not built for comfort. Beside it was a console still warm with recent use. He was not alone. She stepped out from the shadows, her expression stripped of all pretenses, no longer playing the part of wife or handler. Her hair was tied back like she was preparing for surgery, her hands steady as she reached for the console. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "You were never meant to get this far." But he'd stopped listening to what people told him he was meant for. "Where is he?" he demanded, stepping closer, fists trembling with a fury that no longer came from confusion, but clarity. "You used my memories. You rewrote my life. But you forgot something. I remember his laugh. You couldn't erase that." "You think this is about memory?" she shot back, voice cracking with something that sounded like desperation. "This is about pattern collapse. You were never supposed to bond with the subject. That's why we never ran you past phase 1. But something glitched in this loop. You loved him. You chose him. And that made you unpredictable." He took another step forward, eyes darting to the chair. "Then where is he? Show me." She hesitated, then hit a key on the console. A large screen behind her lit up with static before revealing a live feed. His son, asleep in a containment pod, floating in what looked like a lab built into orbit. "They're transmitting his consciousness off-world," she said, softer now. "They believe he's a stable seed, something that can survive multiverse fragmentation. You were supposed to carry him to term. That's what this entire simulation was for. You were the incubator." Those words nearly buckled him to the floor. He had spent years questioning his own mind, believing he was the broken one. But it was never about him. He wasn't the experiment. He was just the delivery system. A voice echoed through the observatory, deep, synthetic, and everywhere at once. "Subject Echo Prime has breached the final firewall. Initiating lockdown." Lights flared red. Alarms began to scream. The comm in his jacket sparked back to life. "Dad?" a small voice said. His son's voice. "I'm scared." He ran to the console, trying to trace the signal, but the interface was locked behind biometric encryption. "Open it," he shouted at her. "You know the sequence, let me talk to him." But she didn't move. Her hands trembled. "If I do, they'll terminate the entire grid. Every version. Every loop. Including him. I've seen it happen. It's not a threat. It's a protocol. Then help me break it." And for the first time since she revealed her true self, she hesitated. Her eyes filled with tears. "I've watched you die over 200 times, she whispered. "In some loops you begged me to stop. In others you begged me not to. But you never gave up on him. Even after all of this. And I never understood why." "Because he's mine," he growled. With shaking hands she typed in a sequence. The console flickered and unlocked. The screen showed his son awake now, looking into the lens of a camera like he could see his father on the other side. "Dad, they said I'm not real," he whispered. He touched the screen like it was glass. "You are," he said, voice breaking. "You're the only thing that is." Then came the twist, sharp and clean. A bullet shattered the console's side panel, sending sparks across the floor. The older version of himself stood at the observatory entrance, weapon raised. "Step away from the terminal," he ordered. "This is the only way to end it. We wipe it all. Let no version of him get used again." It wasn't a bluff. His face, older, more tired, was wild with resolve. He'd seen enough suffering across timelines. "He's a child," he screamed. He's not a variable. He's a person. He's a weapon, the older him snapped. He destabilized the fold across every loop he touched. They won't stop using him. We have to erase him to stop them. But something shifted behind the woman, on the console. A final line of code scrolled up in green text. It was her override key. Not his. Hers. She'd been hiding it. Waiting. She turned to him slowly, jaw clenched. I can send his consciousness to a clean loop. Untraceable. But you'll never find him again. His heart shattered. It was the impossible choice. Let his son be erased, or let him live a life he'd never be able to reach. Do it, he whispered. She entered the command. The screen went black. The older him screamed in rage, firing at the console, but it was already done. Everything around them began to short-circuit. The observatory trembled like it had waited years to fall apart. She looked at him with tears streaming down her face and said, "Now run." And he did. As fire and sparks consumed the observatory, he ran down the mountain, not knowing where his son had gone, but knowing he was free. But in the shadows of the burning building, the older version of himself didn't die. He limped away, calm crackling in his ear. And a voice, calm, female, synthetic, whispered, "New subject detected. Loop initializing. Phase 0 engaged." The game had never been about escape. It had always been about who controlled the reset. The fire had burned out, leaving nothing but cold ash and smoke rising into the quiet morning sky. He stood at the edge of the mountain, the weight of everything he'd lost and everything he'd fought for settling over him like a dense fog. The observatory was gone, and with it, the twisted machinery of control and manipulation that had dictated his life for so long. Yet, despite the victory, the silence that followed was deafening. The device, the glowing heartbeat that had connected him to the impossible, was no longer in his pocket. He had surrendered it when he fled, choosing to walk away from the system that had used his son as a variable, a weapon, a glitch in a broken code. But as he looked out over the horizon, the sun cresting the dark woods below, a fragile hope stirred inside him. Somewhere out there, his son was free, no longer trapped in loops, no longer a pawn in a shadow war between faceless conglomerates and hidden agendas. He didn't know where that freedom had taken him, if it was real or just another carefully crafted illusion. But for the first time in years, he believed that freedom was possible. His mind was a tangled web of memories, some his own and some planted. But the most important truth was the one he chose to hold on to. The love he had for his son, real or manufactured, was the force that had broken the cycle. That love had made him unpredictable, had given him the strength to fight when the world wanted him to surrender. And maybe that was the most human thing left in a world that tried to erase humanity with every reset. He returned home days later, the house quieter than ever. His wife was gone, vanished like a ghost into the backdrop of secrets and lies. He didn't know if she was friend or foe, victim or villain. She had played her role perfectly, an enigma who held pieces of the puzzle he might never fully solve. But he felt no anger anymore, just a profound sadness for the part they both played in a story bigger than either of them. Sitting in the dim light of his living room, he pulled out an old photo album, one that had survived the chaos. Among the pictures was one that made his breath catch, a snapshot of his son, smiling with eyes full of life and innocence, untouched by the horrors of conspiracy or memory manipulation. And beneath it, written in a familiar hand, was a single line. Asterisk, some truths live beyond the loops. Asterisk. That line echoed in his heart as he realized the final twist. No matter how many times they tried to control the past, no matter how many loops they forced him into, there was one constant, the enduring power of connection, memory, and choice. The world might still be watching, still orchestrating shadows from behind screens, but he had reclaimed his story, even if it was imperfect, even if it was uncertain. Because some mysteries are meant to linger, to haunt us long after the final act, reminding us that freedom is a journey, not a destination. And as the camera pans away from the quiet house on the edge of the woods, the faintest flicker of static crackles from an old radio in the corner. A whisper of a voice, maybe a new loop beginning, or perhaps a sign that the story isn't over yet. The question remains, in a world where memory can be rewritten and reality bent, how do we hold on to what makes us truly human? That is the mystery that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark.